The prohibitions of homosexual practice, incest, adultery, and bestiality are moral and not merely ritual impurities based on a set of criteria that distinguish moral offenses from merely ritual offenses. And I've come up with, not just of my own, I've drawn on the material from Jonathan McClellan's and Jacob Milgram, but I've come up with 7 characteristics of the sex laws in Leviticus 18 and 20 that distinguish these from merely ritual offenses, that mark them as moral impurity offenses. First, Leviticus 18 and 20 specifically refer to forbidden acts as iniquity or sin, not just ritual uncleanness. You can be ritually unclean and not have sin, because you can become ritually unclean inadvertently, accidentally come into contact with a corpse, or a woman when she experiences menstrual blood, or a man when he has an emission of semen, or if somebody develops, you touch somebody who didn't know they have leprosy, you become unclean, ritually unclean. But moral impurity is sin. Secondly, these chapters do not permit absolution merely through ritual means. If you're ritually impure, you can bathe and wait for the sun to go down for many ritual impurities, or it may take a longer time for more virulent ritual impurities. That won't cut it for a moral impurity. You can't just bathe and wait for the passage of time. Third, these chapters do not treat the sexual offenses as making participants contagious to touch. Many forms of ritual impurity are contagious to touch. That's not true of moral impurity. If you touch somebody who's committed an act of adultery, you can't catch adultery, or incest, or bestiality, or homosexual practice. Fourth, these chapters do not penalize persons without willful intent. In chapter 20, which takes the sex offenses in Leviticus 18 and prioritizes them as first or second tier offenses and gives penalties. Therein, we find this culpability formula, often repeated: their blood be upon them. That's a way of underscoring that you're responsible for the act that you knowingly committed. Now, I know from another video that's done by McClellan that he would claim, well, but these can't be intentional acts, because their blood be upon them is also used of a woman who has sex with an animal. Actually, that argument doesn't really fly, and that's because biblical texts do ascribe a limited degree of responsibility to the animal, here and elsewhere. For example, if the animal gores a human, that animal is executed because it's held culpable. Fifth, and we should mention one other example, like adultery, right? If a woman who is married has sex with a man, but she cries out because obviously she doesn't want to, it's being forced on her, it's an act of rape, then she is not held culpable for committing adultery, because this involves not inadvertent acts, but advertent acts, not unintentional acts or acts forced in one, but only intentional acts. Fifth, the sex prohibitions in Leviticus 18 and 20 contain an implicit rationale for each prohibition. They're not just precognitive and visceral. For example, with regard to incest, the summary heading in Leviticus 18:6, you shall not have sex with the flesh of your own flesh, right? Somebody is already too much you on the level of kinship, insufficient kinship otherness. That's the rationale, similar to the one that we would use. We would just explain not enough differentiation in the gene pool. 6, these chapters apply the prohibitions not just to Jews, which would be true of ritual offenses, but to resident aliens or Gentiles as well, Gentiles in the land. And 7th, they use the word toavah rather than the word shekets to distinguish a moral from merely ceremonial abomination. That argument, for example, is also used by McClellan to single out the sex prohibitions in Leviticus 18 and 20 as moral abominations. In all these respects, the sex laws in Leviticus 18 and 20, including the prohibition of homosexual practice, come under the heading of moral rather than merely ritual impurity. McClellan completely ignores this, and in doing so, he loses the war.